In the humble community of Harlow, Maine, youthful Craig lives with his father, who has been feeling steady blue since his significant other died. They go to chapel together every Sunday as a general rule, and Craig is frequently permitted to peruse the book of scriptures to everybody as a component of the help. It's during one of these many masses that solitary tycoon Mr. Harrigan considers Craig and later chooses to visit him to make a proposition for employment. Since his eyes are falling flat, he needs to recruit the kid to peruse books to him. Craig doesn't know why he's picked over other town kids that are more intelligent or better perusers, yet he isn't going to give the chance to bring some additional money home. Harrigan's chateau is at the edge of town, and Craig strolls there 3 times each week to peruse to Harrigan and drink tea arranged by the maid Edna. A portion of the books are progressed for his age, however Craig gradually figures out how to grasp them and partakes in the philosophical conversations that they offer of real value. He likewise appreciates checking out the extravagant rooms in the chateau and Harrigan's assortment of blossoms. However, there is a locked wardrobe he isn't permitted to investigate on the grounds that as per Harrigan, it's loaded with horrible mysteries. Some of the time Craig does unspecialized temp jobs around the house as well, such as scooping the snow from the yard. Yet with regards to papers, Harrigan peruses them himself to stay aware of monetary news. The additional time Craig enjoys with Harrigan, the more inquisitive he becomes about the man's past. So one evening he at long last surrenders and researches him. It turns out Harrigan used to be a finance manager known for being savage and for his threatening takeovers. It isn't popular overall to mean he never got hitched or had any children, and the couple of family members he has don't coexist with him either, meaning he carries on with a forlorn life. Since Craig has consistently felt regretful for his mom's passing, he identifies with Harrigan more than he ought to. Now that Craig is working for him, Harrigan sends him a card with a lotto ticket for Valentine's, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Craig's birthday. However, he wins nothing. 5 years pass, and keeping in mind that Craig turns into a teen, his age has never halted from as yet coming to Harrigan's home 3 times each week to peruse, possibly having missed one day when he got this season's virus. Despite the fact that he was wiped out around then, Craig actually felt remorseful since he thinks their time together is the high point in Harrigan's week. Since Harlow doesn't have a secondary school, Craig should take a transport to the nearest city each day when his opportunity to go to at last comes. It's all in all a shock for a modest community kid like him to find out about coteries and social principles, particularly since the vast majority of local people have telephones and he doesn't. Yet he actually figures out how to make a few companions. The most stunning piece of his most memorable day anyway is being drawn nearer by a domineering jerk called Kenny, who anticipates that Craig should sparkle his shoes in the restroom, since that is the beginner's work. Craig declines, and when their discussion turns into a contention, Ms. Hart keeps an eye on them. However, Craig isn't a narc and tells her all is great. Tragically, Kenny doesn't see this as a decent signal, and when the educator is gone, he actually guarantees Craig a terrible time from now on. At the point when Craig returns home after class, he doesn't specify the occurrence to his father and requests a telephone, all things considered, yet at the same he's denied. The following time Craig goes to Harrigan's, he inquires as to whether he at any point experienced harassers or individuals that attempted to exploit him at work to look for guidance. Harrigan makes sense if he did, and he managed every one of them brutally. A couple of months pass, and when Christmas comes, Craig gets 2 superb presents. His father at long last gets him a telephone, and Harrigan's lotto ticket procures him $3,000. Craig's most memorable call is to Harrigan to say thanks to him for the gift, and Harrigan makes sense of it's only a tad something he accomplishes for each individual he calls a companion. Having a telephone permits Craig to sit with the well-known kids and interface with a charming young lady that he has eyes for. Getting new companions doesn't prevent him from as yet going to Harrigan's, and it prompts the elderly person to ask Craig for what reason he continues to come, regardless of whether he can have a public activity now. Subsequently, Craig makes sense if he doesn't come in view of some feeling of responsibility. He truly partakes in his time in Harrigan's organization, which makes Harrigan. In the wake of hearing such a miserable inquiry, Craig persuades his father not to place all the lotto cash in his school asset and uses part of it to purchase a telephone for Harrigan. At first, the elderly person doesn't need it, since he's apprehensive he would get dependent on it. To this end, he doesn't have a television or a radio either. Yet he rapidly alters his perspective when Craig shows him he can stay aware of the securities exchange and the news continuously, as opposed to sitting tight for the following day's paper. From that point on, during each visit, Craig would show Harrigan better approaches for utilizing the telephone before they hop into perusing. This incorporates setting up his voice message and picking a moniker, which is privateer ruler on the grounds that the papers used to call him that. Craig additionally asks Harrigan for his main tune to put as his ringtone. As weeks pass, Harrigan becomes dependent on the telephone and at times overlooks Craig's perusing. However, luckily getting him in the groove again is simple. Craig starts stressing a piece when Harrigan begins requiring an oxygen tank to rest and asks why Harrigan has decided to reside in such a modest community, away from further developed care, provoking Harrigan to admit he needed to reside where individuals don't ask things from him. Consequently, Craig makes sense of he couldn't want anything more than to move to the enormous city to turn into a screenwriter. Harrigan doesn't support, since there are consistently foes impeding you in that sort of business, and makes Craig guarantee that assuming he at any point goes down that profession street, he'll dispatch any foes with scramble and with practically no responsibility. Craig is dazzled by the reality Harrigan can in any case hold himself with power even in this debilitated state. Yet he likewise feels terrible for Harrigan on the grounds that he found a cabinet loaded with lotto tickets, meaning he doesn't have numerous companions to send them to. A couple of days after the fact, Craig comes to the chateau while Edna is having her vacation day and gives himself access after Harrigan takes excessively lengthy to open the entryway. Unfortunately, not the telephone is diverting him, however something more awful. Harrigan has kicked the bucket on his seat with his telephone in his grasp. It's an exceptionally upsetting and disturbing picture to find, and it hits Craig harder when he snatches the telephone and finds Harrigan had been going to call him. Crying, Craig calls his father for help prior to respecting Harrigan's existence with his number one abstract statement. An emergency vehicle and the police come to deal with everything, and when Craig makes it home that night, he's so drained he didn't understand he carried Harrigan's telephone with him also. As one last farewell to his dearest companion, Craig sends a message to Harrigan's telephone, saying he'll miss their evenings together. The day of the memorial service, relatively few individuals join in. However, Craig actually peruses a section from the Book of Scriptures and puts Harrigan's telephone inside the suit they've placed on the body. Harrigan is covered close to Craig's mom, who is visited week by his father. However, Craig himself just came once on the grounds that it would be tolerating she's gone until the end of time. After the entombment is finished, Craig is given an envelope by the man responsible for Harrigan's funds with a letter from the elderly person, making sense of what he's left him in his will. While Harrigan didn't endorse Craig's profession decision, he actually needed to help him, so he passed on him $800,000 in trust to cover school and any postgraduate work he might pick. The most stunning part is a PS saying Harrigan'll miss their evenings together as well, as though answering to Craig's instant message and keeping in mind that Craig needs to put it on an occurrence. He can't quit mulling over everything. Later during a turbulent evening, he calls Harrigan's voice message and leaves him a message saying thanks to him for the gift, yet in addition, conceding he would give it back if he would have his companion again, in light of the fact that he misses him. The following morning, Craig awakens to track down the creepiest message on his telephone. Some way or another Harrigan has messaged him back, albeit the answer is only a lot of irregular letters. Going nuts at the thought they may have covered Harrigan alive, Craig asks his father for help. However, his father makes sense of this is likely a trickster that cloned the number. Harrigan can't be alive in light of the fact that the medical clinic did a full postmortem prior to delivering the body for the burial service. This clarification is as yet insufficient for Craig, who visits the burial ground and calls Harrigan's telephone just to go crazy again when he hears the ringtone coming from his grave. A short time later, Craig goes to Harrigan's home and has tea with Edna, who affirms Harrigan left her and the nursery worker some cash too. She likewise concurs that Harrigan was a decent man, yet you would have rather not had him on your terrible side. For instance, the past nursery worker took from him and Harrigan made him think twice about it. In the wake of declining to offer subtleties, Edna permits Craig to take something so he can recollect Harrigan by, and Craig takes one of Harrigan's number one blossoms. Before long, a short time later, Harrigan's home goes available to be purchased, and Edna is permitted to remain in the meantime to deal with the spot. When he's feeling improved, Craig returns to school and really partakes in his classes, particularly because of Ms. Hart, who is an amazing, steady educator. Kenny doesn't irritate him much any longer, and at last gets removed for selling grass nearby. Craig wasn't the one to betray him. However, Kenny actually figures he did. Things get surprisingly better when Craig will go to the colder time of year hit the dance floor with his crush. Yet the ideal night is destroyed when Kenny appears at school again to thump Craig for squealing and taking steps to kill him, assuming he at any point informs anybody regarding this. It's Mr. Hart who finds him minutes after the fact, and she thinks Kenny got it done. However, Craig denies it since he needs to graduate without causing problems. At the point when Craig returns home, he won't examine what occurred, provoking his father to bring up he wants to converse with somebody as opposed to restraining his sentiments. Heeding this guidance, Craig chooses to call Harrigan's telephone and offer his apprehensions with the phone message. The following morning, the entire town is stirred up by the most recent news. Kenny has been viewed as dead. Craig can't quit feeling overpowered with responsibility when he sees Kenny's family lamenting, acknowledging even domineering jerks have individuals that adoration them. He can't quit contemplating this the remainder of the day, and it keeps him occupied during his examples. So Ms. Hart converses with him after class to comfort him and remind him not to fault himself. Since she's forever been so understanding, Craig raises the subject of phantoms, and Ms. Hart concedes she could do without to play with things like Ouija sheets and such, in light of the fact that his grandmother generally showed her not all apparitions are blessed. Sometime thereafter, Craig visits where Harrigan's old groundskeeper used to reside, and a neighbor clarifies for him the man finished things in his truck when it became unimaginable for him to find another line of work after Harrigan terminated him. Craig's interest gets the better of him and makes him check said truck just to blow up when he finds a lotto ticket inside. On out, Craig sees spray painting on the carport entryway that wasn't done, however was plainly an affront towards Harrigan. At night, Craig calls Harrigan's telephone to request that he convey him a message, assuming he really had a say in Kenny's passing, and when he hangs up, his telephone rings with Harrigan's number and gets another message that doesn't seem okay. The next day, Craig shares what has been the deal with the nearby minister under the mark of admission. However, the cleric concurs with Craig's father and thinks somebody cloned the telephone number for a trick. Attempting to cause Craig to feel less regretful, the cleric shares the subtleties of Kenny's demise. He had been drinking intensely that evening, and when he attempted to escape the house he slipped and fell, meaning it was a mishap. What the cleric doesn't have any idea anyway is that Kenny's mouth had been loaded with shoe clean. The cleric encourages Craig to reevaluate his fanatical relationship with his telephone, and Craig does precisely that by going to the store and getting another refreshed model. The representative that sets everything up for him makes sense of that the odd messages might have been stuck in the product, which is known as a phantom in the machine. Every one of the contacts are moved to the new telephone, and when Craig attempts to call Harrigan this time, it doesn't work, so he expects to be it's at long last finished. When he shows up at his home, Craig tosses the old telephone in the junk. However, he before long thinks twice about it and puts it inside a case brimming with little recollections that he conceals in his storeroom. With Kenny's misfortune and his kinship with Harrigan generally present at the rear of his brain, Craig moves on from secondary school and is acknowledged to a college in Boston. The day he ventures out from home, he figures he could see his mom expressing farewell to him close to his father. College life is really perfect, and Craig appreciates being encircled by the subjects he cherishes. However, not quite a while passes before misfortune strikes once more. One evening, he gets horrendous news from his father. Ms. Hart kicked the bucket in an auto crash brought about by a boozer called Senior Member. Crushed, Craig promptly returns home to go to Ms. Hart's burial service and watch out for Dignitaries Preliminary, which has the most frustrating of endings. The person has had many captures for driving while savored the past and didn't actually have his permit any longer. However, he will stay away from prison once more by promising to do rebuild time, all things considered. This outcome rankles Craig, who surges back to his experience growing up room to recover his old box, and keeping in mind that looking through his storeroom, he finds an old blossom crown his mom had made for him when he was a youngster, and he likewise concealed after she kicked the bucket. Not even this little trinket is sufficient to comfort him, however, and when he finds his old telephone in the crate, he calls Harrigan's number and leaves a message on the voice message requesting Dignitaries passing. The call is made in a snapshot of visually impaired fierceness, and after Craig quiets down and returns to his standard daily schedule, he can't quit having a liable outlook on what he did, continually researching Senior Member's name to be certain he's actually fine. A couple of days after the fact, Craig's trepidation turns into a reality when Senior Member's passing shows up in the paper, albeit the reason is still being scrutinized. Not entirely settled to figure out reality, Craig drives the whole way to the therapy clinic and claims to be a columnist to pay a medical caretaker for some data. It's accepted Dignitary did it to himself, since he was found in the shower with a portion of a bar of cleanser down his throat, and cleanser had been found in the examination that highlighted him having gulped it to make the section of the cleanser simpler. What makes the episode extra upsetting is the reality the cleanser was a similar brand Ms. Hart utilized, and the note senior member left behind was a statement from Harrigan's main tune. When the medical caretaker wraps up giving the subtleties, Craig gets back to his vehicle and has an all-out breakdown over the reality he's a killer now. At the point when he gets back to his old house later, Craig finds one more strange message from Harrigan and recalls that after his demise, he at last investigated the mystery storeroom and found the items were only recollections of Harrigan's experience growing up, particularly his dead mother. Craig thinks Harrigan has forever been, however forlorn as he may be, and that is the reason he continues to attempt to keep in contact. So he visits Harrigan's grave and contemplates whether those messages were Harrigan's method for advising Craig to stop. In the wake of saying thanks to Harrigan for all that and saying sorry to his mother in tears, Craig rushes to the town quarry, taking into account finishing things for himself. Fortunately, he sees clearness prior to accomplishing something dumb and tosses his old telephone into the stream, all things considered, permitting Harrigan to rest in peace at long last.